History books are written in the ink of conquest. We are taught from our very first breath that power is a clenched fist, that success is measured by the height of our walls and the depth of our bank accounts. In the grand, sprawling theaters of the modern world, power is inherently loud. It demands to be seen through flashing motorcades. It demands to be heard through the deafening roar of authority. It is a desperate, endless grasp for control. But in the autumn of 2025, a radically different kind of sovereignty emerged on the American asphalt. 19 men, draped in the ancient color of autumn leaves, stepped onto the road. They did not move as individuals. They moved as a single, breathing entity. 19 hearts beating in a synchronized rhythm. 19 minds anchored to a singular purpose. This was the Walk for Peace, a sprawling, 2,300-mile defiance of everything modern society deems essential. Yet, as this collective entity prepared to face a brutal, unforgiving highway, an unforeseen element was waiting. A voiceless companion carrying a profound secret about shared suffering, a secret that would eventually bring a fractured, cynical nation to its knees. But that revelation was still miles away, hidden in the dust of the road ahead. Why should the modern skeptic pause? Why should the executive, the politician, or the cynic care about 19 silent figures walking with nothing? Because what you are witnessing is a masterclass in the true anatomy of power. Look at the empires of history. Kings build fortresses. Billionaires build bunkers. Dictators shout to command the room. They are entirely, pitifully dependent on the material things they hoard. Take away their wealth, and they vanish. But these 19 monks hold out empty alms bowls. To the untrained modern eye, to the billionaire driving past them in a climate-controlled sedan, they look like beggars. They look destitute. But the narrative flips the moment you look closer. They are not asking the world for anything. They are offering the world everything. By owning absolutely nothing, they possess the entire landscape. By requiring nothing more than a single, donated meal a day, they are vastly freer than the men who believe they own the roads. They are the beggar kings. And in their profound, chosen poverty, they offer a blueprint for deep, societal healing, a kind of healing that cannot be legislated in Parliament or bought on Wall Street. It is a healing that forces us to realize true wealth is not what you can endlessly gather, but what you can happily do without. The journey began where the air is heavy and the earth is merciless. Texas, October. The asphalt here is not merely a road. It is a river of black fire. It radiates a baking heat that warps the horizon and punishes the flesh. Step by step, barefoot against boiling tar. There are no thick rubber soles to buffer the shock of the earth. There are no insulated cabins to shield them from the choking exhaust of passing 18-wheelers. Yet, the collective organism does not flinch. When a sharp stone cuts into the heel of one monk, the entire group feels the sting, instinctively adjusting their unified rhythm to carry the weight. They do not speak of the blistering pain. They absorb it together, on transmuting physical agony into spiritual endurance. Their silence is absolute. It is a deafening, majestic quiet that cuts sharply through the chaotic roar of highway traffic. The Texas sun beats down relentlessly on their shaved heads, a harsh interrogator attempting to break their vow. But the heat only forges their unity into something unbreakable. With eyes lowered and postures towering in their humility, they are an invading army of absolute stillness, conquering the noise of a divided world with the rhythmic, hypnotic slap of bare feet against the ground. History teaches us that empires often crumble not from slow decay, but from sudden, violent trauma. The dictator panics when his fortress is breached. The billionaire despairs when the market crashes. On November 19th, in the dusty expanse of Dayton, Texas, the fragile mortal shell of this silent procession met the chaotic, devastating force of the modern world. A truck, a hulking, roaring monument to industrial speed, collided with the line of monks. In an instant, the collective body was struck. Flesh and bone were thrown against unyielding steel and unforgiving asphalt. In the ordinary world of power, this is where the machinery of outrage begins. This is where lawsuits are filed, where blame is shouted, where the victim demands retribution from the aggressor. But what happened next would test their vow of silence and challenge every deeply ingrained human instinct of self-preservation. The 19 did not fracture into panicked individuals. When the elder monks were thrown to the ground, the entire organism bled. They felt the physical shockwave as one unified entity. Yet, they did not scream in indignation. They calmly rose from the dust. They looked upon the wreckage, and they looked upon the trembling, terrified driver, not with the fiery, vengeful eyes of victims, but with the cool, bottomless depths of absolute compassion. They offered immediate, silent forgiveness. Their physical vulnerability was put on horrific, public display, but it merely served to illuminate their invincible mental fortress. True kings do not need to inflict pain to prove their sovereignty. By absorbing the violence of the world without returning it, the collective proved that their strength was not of the flesh, but of an untethered mind. As the wounded collective pressed onward, limping but unbroken, the landscape began to shift. They walked slowly out of the sprawling Texas plains and into the cultural fortress of the Deep South, the Bible Belt. Here, in the heartland of a vastly different faith, skepticism could easily have become an impenetrable wall. To the locals, the sight of saffron robes and shaved heads was utterly foreign, a stark anomaly against the familiar backdrop of steeple-dotted towns and roaring engines. But a vital bridge was forming, softening the hardened edges of suspicion. A small, stray creature had joined their ranks, walking perfectly in step with the 19 men. This was Aloka the peace dog. She did not belong to any single monk. She belonged entirely to the collective journey. She walked as an extension of their spirit, her paws growing as calloused as their bare feet, her quiet demeanor mirroring their boundless endurance. Aloka the peace dog became the universal, emotional translator for a community that spoke no words. When the wary locals saw these towering, stoic men gently sharing their single, meager daily meal with a weary, dust-covered animal, the invisible walls of religious and cultural dogma simply dissolved. Observe the profound, radical leveling of society that unfolded in their wake. On a lonely stretch of a southern highway, a high-powered corporate executive abruptly halted his sleek, luxury vehicle. He stepped out in a tailored suit, his symbols of secular power suddenly rendered meaningless, to carefully place fresh fruit into a monk's wooden alms bowl. Miles later, a homeless veteran, a man forgotten and discarded by the very empire he once served, approached the silent line to offer a crumpled, faded dollar bill and a half-eaten loaf of bread. The billionaire and the beggar. Both bowed their heads to the men who owned nothing. In the presence of absolute renunciation, the artificial hierarchies of modern wealth and status completely evaporated. The monks did not beg for these offerings. They provided a rare, sacred opportunity for a fractured, isolated world to practice pure generosity. By holding out an empty bowl, they allowed the rich man to empty his pride, and the poor man to discover his own inherent worth. Winter arrives not merely as a change of season, but as a ruthless, indiscriminate inquisitor. By January of 2026, the winding, elevated highways of the Carolinas had transformed into an endless, frozen abyss. The sprawling, arrogant empire of noise was abruptly silenced by the suffocating, a heavy weight of a historic snowstorm. Here, the visual contrast is absolute and unforgettable. 19 brilliant flashes of saffron piercing through a blinding, monochromatic wasteland of white. The temperature plummets far below freezing. Ice clings stubbornly to the thin, woven cotton of their robes. Frost bites deeply into the exposed, calloused skin of their bare feet. To the modern observer, a society swaddled in layers of synthetic insulation, entirely dependent on the burning of fossil fuels for its survival. This is not a walk. This is a death march. Look at the sleek luxury vehicles and armored SUVs abandoned on the side of the icy road, paralyzed and rendered utterly useless by the storm. The pinnacle of human engineering, defeated by the sky. But the beggar kings do not falter. They simply glide past the frozen monuments of modern power. When the howling wind tears away their final, meager comfort of physical warmth, the collective entity breathes deeper. They anchor their 19 minds not to the freezing, trembling flesh, but to the unwavering, white-hot fire of their purpose. They become an unstoppable glacier of human willpower. Nature, in all its devastating, indiscriminate fury, cannot conquer men who have already conquered themselves. Yet, even the most invincible spiritual fortress is housed in fragile, mortal vessels. And it was here, in this bitter, unforgiving ice, that the hidden secret of their voiceless companion was finally revealed to a watching world. As the snow deepened into impassable drifts, the small, rhythmic steps of the stray faltered. The freezing, to jagged asphalt tore mercilessly at her unprotected paws. She began to limp, her physical strength rapidly failing against the brutal elements. Suddenly, the relentless forward momentum of the 19 monks stopped. They stopped as one. The collective halted its majestic, towering march to tend to the smallest, most vulnerable soul among them. They knelt in the snow, wrapping her shivering, exhausted body in the folds of their own freezing robes, voluntarily surrendering what little precious warmth they possessed to keep her alive. This was the secret of the silent invasion finally unveiled. The ultimate power of the true renouncer is not merely the stoic endurance of their own suffering, but their infinite, boundless capacity to absorb the suffering of others. As images of these freezing, barefoot kings carrying their wounded companions spread across digital networks, the cynical, outrage-driven machinery of the modern world ground to a total halt. The screens that normally broadcasted endless political vitriol and economic panic were suddenly filled with a raw, undeniable image of absolute, selfless love. A fractured, cynical nation wept. People from all walks of life, those who build the walls of society and those who sleep in its gutters, drove out into the blinding blizzard. They came not to argue, not to debate ideology, but to silently offer heavy blankets, thermoses of hot water, and tearful reverence. The sight of their shared, voluntary suffering became a mirror, reflecting the exhausted, battered soul of a country desperate for redemption. In that freezing, desolate, snow-blind landscape, a profound, undeniable healing began to take root. It was a healing that bypassed the skeptical intellect and struck directly at the hardened, frozen human heart. It proved to millions that true sovereignty is the ability to melt the ice of human apathy with the quiet, overwhelming warmth of pure empathy. The long, unforgiving road inevitably leads to the very epicenter of the empire. February of 2026. The biting chill of winter still clings stubbornly to the air as the winding rural highways finally surrender to the structured, imposing grid of Washington District of Columbia. This is the undisputed citadel of modern, earthly power. It is a sprawling fortress of pristine white marble, imposing granite columns, and heavily guarded iron gates. Here, in the shadows of towering monuments built to glorify wars and conquerors, influence is the ultimate intoxicating currency. It is a city that never sleeps and never stops talking. It is a metropolis built entirely upon the frantic, relentless pursuit of leverage, where success is fiercely calculated by the ability to manipulate global economies, command vast militaries, and crush political opposition. The air itself vibrates with the invisible, suffocating weight of authority, paranoia, and ambition. Into this grand, chaotic theater of the world's most powerful men and women, the silent invasion makes its final, breathtaking advance. The contrast is almost incomprehensible in its sheer, monumental visual magnitude. 19 figures, draped in simple, faded saffron robes, stepping softly onto the manicured, historic avenues of the capital. They do not arrive shielded by a phalanx of armored vehicles. They are not heralded by the blaring sirens of police escorts or the aggressive, demanding shouts of press pools. They arrive exactly as they departed, with empty hands, lowered eyes, and deeply scarred bare feet. They are the ultimate paradox made flesh. The beggar kings standing quietly before the towering white pillars of the emperor's palace. The men in tailored suits, clutching briefcases full of state secrets, rush past, entirely blind to the true royalty walking beside them. What then did these agonizing, unbroken 2,300 miles actually prove to a watching, highly skeptical world? The politicians inside the heavily fortified walls look out through bulletproof glass and see only vulnerability. But the historian of power looks at these 19 collective monks and sees the only true, unshakable invincibility that exists on this earth. The men who govern from the oval desks and the corporate boardrooms are secretly terrified. They are constantly imprisoned by the paralyzing, endless fear of losing their wealth, their status, their carefully curated public image. They are hopelessly chained to the very things they hoard. But how do you threaten a collective entity that has completely, voluntarily surrendered its desire for shelter, for money, for recognition? You cannot blackmail a mind that craves absolutely nothing. You cannot subjugate or conquer a human spirit that has joyfully embraced its own physical poverty. By stripping away every single layer of material security, by holding on to nothing but their shared breath, these barefoot wanderers have achieved a level of absolute or impenetrable freedom that the billionaires and the presidents can only faintly dream of. True, unshakable sovereignty is not the ability to dominate the world around you. It is the absolute, quiet dominion over your own turbulent mind. They proved, with every drop of blood spilled on the boiling asphalt of Texas and every shivering breath drawn in the frozen wastelands of the Carolinas, that peace is never merely the passive absence of conflict. It is not a quiet, comfortable retreat from the world. It is a fiercely active, excruciatingly difficult pursuit. It is the monumental courage to walk directly into the deafening, aggressive noise of a profoundly divided nation and respond with a weapon far more devastating than anger. Unbroken, radical compassion. As the physical footsteps of this historic but collective journey finally come to a halt on the cold pavement of the capital, the profound echo of their endeavor continues to reverberate through the concrete foundations of our society. The walk for peace has ended, but the monumental philosophical challenge it laid at our feet has only just begun. We are a civilization drowning in our own desperate accumulation, building our walls ever higher, hoarding our wealth ever deeper, yet finding ourselves more terrified, angry, and isolated than ever before. We are bleeding from the spiritual wounds of endless division, screaming at each other across the deep, widening chasms of ideology and class. The cure for this pervasive modern sickness will not be legislated in the loud, echoing halls of Congress, nor can it be manufactured in the sterile laboratories of industry. The profound, the lasting healing we so desperately seek as a nation requires us to look away from the glittering, hollow crowns of earthly power and look instead toward the empty, wooden bowl of the renouncer. It demands the terrifying, beautiful realization that true wealth is not what you can relentlessly gather, but what you can happily, peacefully do without. Let the image of the 19 silent kings remain permanently etched into the consciousness of this loud, chaotic world. Let their unified, breathing journey stand as a timeless, unshakable monument to the supreme power of letting go. When the noise of your own life becomes deafening, when the endless pursuit of control begins to crush your spirit and divide your home, remember the profound, invincible silence of the walk for peace. Empty your hands, quiet your mind, and allow the quiet, what miraculous work of healing to finally begin.